Picture it for a second. Morning light in a small kitchen. A child's drawing on the fridge. Two mismatched mugs. A man and a woman who finally stopped running, sitting in the kind of quiet that people build whole lives trying to reach. Hold on to that picture, because I'm going to take it away from you in about 90 seconds, and I need you to remember that it was real. The most feared man in Seoul had not slept. Woo Jin had sat in that living room through the entire night, upright, jacket folded over the arm of the sofa, a cup of tea going cold in his hands because he had not been able to decide whether drinking it would be presumptuous. This is a man who once removed every person responsible for his father's death, one at a time, without rushing. He had been defeated, completely, by a chipped mug and a basket of toys. At one point during the night, he had measured his own pulse. 41 beats per minute. He had faced down rival bosses and federal investigators at 41. Then Leo's toy fire truck had rolled off the basket on its own in the dark, and Woo Jin's heart rate had jumped to 96, and he had sat there in the silence, genuinely offended that a plastic truck had done to him what 15 years of enemies could not. So that is the picture.
Warm.
Safe. Almost over.
Now.
Rewind 11 hours to the moment before any of it was safe at all, because Nadia had not yet said the name, and the name changes everything. Last night, she had told him to ask her again in the morning.
It was morning now.
And Woo Jin, who had never once in 15 years waited for anything he could simply take, had waited all night to ask a waitress whether she would trust him. He did not get up when she came in. He had decided, somewhere around 4 in the morning, that standing would look like a man trying to control the room, and that was the one thing he could not afford to look like in front of her. So he stayed seated, and he asked her the way she had told him to. "Can you trust me now?" Nadia looked at him for a long moment. Then she set down her mug, and she walked past him without a word, back down the hall to the bedroom. He heard the wardrobe open. There had been 2 envelopes in that wardrobe for 3 years. He had already read the first one last night, the letter in Shin's handwriting, the one that proved Shin was told about the child before he ever came to her door. This was the second one, smaller, older. The one she had never shown anyone, the one that held the name itself, because Nadia had learned a long time ago that you do not write a name like this down twice. She came back into the kitchen. She did not hand it to him. She held it against her chest with both hands, and she looked at the man who had spent the night not drinking a cup of tea, and she made the calculation she had been making for 3 years finally come out in her favor. "His name is Du Han," she said. Woo Jin did not move. She had braced for question, for disbelief, for the cold operational calm she had watched come down over his face in the restaurant like a shutter. She had not braced for what actually happened, which was nothing, for 4 full seconds, while a man she had loved went somewhere very far away behind his own eyes. Because Nadia had given him a stranger's name, and Woo Jin had heard the name of the man who held his coat at his father's funeral. "That is not possible," he said quietly. "I know who he is to you," Nadia said. "I have known for 3 years. That is why I did not say it." "Du Han is my uncle," he said. "He carried my father's portrait at the memorial. He stood behind me while I buried him." The sentence had nowhere safe to go, so he let it stop. The crescent birthmark on his own neck had meant, his entire life, that family was protection. He was sitting in a small kitchen learning that it had also meant the exact opposite, and that the man who taught him the difference between the two had been the one to prove it. Woo Jin's mind did the thing it always did under pressure. It started counting. He counted backward through 15 years of a man's hand on his shoulder. Du Han at the funeral, steady when Woo Jin was 17 and could not be. Du Han in the early years, never reaching for power, never challenging, always one respectful step outside the room where decisions were made. The whole organization had read that distance as loyalty, as an old man who knew his place. Woo Jin had read it that way too, for 15 years, and had been quietly grateful for the one relative who seemed to want nothing from him. He understood now that wanting nothing visible was the most patient strategy a man could run. Du Han had not stayed outside the room because he accepted he would never enter it. He had stayed outside because he had already decided how he would walk in. And the only thing that had ever stood between Du Han and that door was the absence of an heir. The moment one existed, the line of succession ran through a child instead of through him, and 40 years of patience would have been spent on nothing. Nadia watched the understanding move across his face and recognized it, because she had made the same journey 3 years ago, alone, with no one to confirm it for her. "You see it now," she said. It was not a question. "How long did it take you?" he asked. "About a week," she said. "I had less to lose than you do."
He was only a monster to me.
To you he was family. If you just felt the floor tilt the way Woo Jin did, then you understand why this channel exists. If you came back for this ending, you already know what these two have survived. And if the algorithm just dropped you into their story for the first time, stay, because everything that was buried is about to come up for air. Subscribing tells Afro-Korean Love Tales Hub that these stories are landing, and it is the only reason endings like this one keep getting made. The old Woo Jin would have already been in the car. The old Woo Jin would have driven to Do Han's house himself, alone, and ended it the way he ended everything, in order, without rushing, and been back before lunch. Nadia saw the shift happen and named it before he could move. "You want to kill him," she said. "Yes," Woo Jin said, because lying to her had never once worked, and he had stopped trying years ago. "And if you do, Leo grows up the son of a man who solves things the way Do Han does. You will have protected him by becoming the exact reason he was in danger." He looked at her for a long moment. 6 years ago, he had loved her for the way she said exactly what she thought about a confusing piece of art. He understood now that the same quality, pointed at him at the worst moment of his life, was the most useful thing in the room. "Then what do you suggest?" he said, and he was not being sarcastic. He genuinely wanted to know. It had been 15 years since he had asked anyone that question, and meant it. "You have spent 15 years being the most dangerous man in Seoul," she said. Do Han has spent 15 years counting on it. He built his whole plan around the idea that you would react like a weapon because a weapon is easy to predict and easy to blame. So, do not be the weapon. Be the one thing he never planned for. Woo Jin waited. "Hand him to the law," she said.
Alive.
"Let the man who has been building a case for 3 years finish it." There was a number in Woo Jin's phone under no name at all. He had called it once, last night, in the worst hour of his life, and given a stranger enough to begin dismantling his enemies. He had assumed that call was the end of something. He was beginning to understand it might have been the beginning. He looked at the blank contact for a moment, and then he did something he had not done in 15 years of running an organization built on never needing anyone. He asked for help on purpose. 3 kilometers away, in a room that smelled of cold coffee and 3 years of dead ends, Prosecutor Park answered on the second ring. She had not slept either. The man who had called her in the night had given her names and locations that had already, in the small hours, taken 4 of Woo Jin's enemies off the board through channels she did not fully understand and had decided not to examine too closely. She had assumed that was a one-time gift from a man in a crisis. Now the same block number was calling again in daylight. What Woo Jin offered her was not 4 names. It was everything. The full architecture of the faction Do Han had been quietly building in the spaces Woo Jin left unattended. The accounts, the routes, the people, the proof. In exchange, he wanted one guarantee, the same one he had asked for last night, that a woman and a child whose names he would not say would never appear in a single file. Park was quiet for a long moment. Then she asked the only question that mattered to her. "Why hand me the man who is your own blood?" "Because the last man who solved a family problem with blood was my father," Woo Jin said. "And he taught me to do the same. I am trying to teach my son something else." He ended the call before she could answer, because he had discovered he did not enjoy the sound of his own sincerity and wanted it to stop. Woo Jin did not go to Do Han. Not yet. There was one conversation he had to have first, and it could not happen over a phone. He drove to a tea house that had been closed for years, a place only 2 men in the world still had a key to, and he waited at an upturned table in the dark until the second man arrived. Shin came in the way he did everything, without sound and without expectation, and stood near the door because he had not been invited to sit. Last night Woo Jin had told him to get out. Shin had assumed the next time they met, one of them would not leave. He noted, with the flat interior calm of a man cataloging his own likely death, that Woo Jin had chosen a place with only one exit. "If you are going to do it," Shin said, "I would prefer it not be slow. I have a low tolerance for speeches." Woo Jin did not stand. He slid a letter across the table instead. The aged one, in Shin's own handwriting. The one Nadia had kept for 3 years. Shin looked at it without touching it. "I know what it says," Shin said. "I wrote it." "You wrote what you believed," Woo Jin said. "I am here to tell you what was true." They are not the same thing, and you have spent 6 years not knowing the difference. Here was the part Shin had never known. The danger he had warned Nadia about 6 years ago had been real. That was what made the lie work. A rival faction truly had been told there was a Wu heir on the way, and they truly would have used a child as leverage. Shin had not invented a single word of the threat he carried to her door. What Shin had never known was the source. It was Du Han who had told that rival faction about the pregnancy in the first place. Du Han who lit the fire, then walked calmly to the one man in the organization whose conscience could be trusted absolutely, and pointed him at the flames. He had needed a loyal man to move Nadia, because a loyal man would do it quietly, permanently, and out of love rather than malice, and would never once think to ask who had struck the match. Shin had been chosen precisely because he was the best of them. His decency was the tool. Shin did not react the way other men would have. There was no outburst, no denial, no plea. He simply went still in the way that had unsettled people for 20 years, except this time it was turned entirely inward. For 6 years he had carried the weight of a decision he believed he had made. He was learning, in a closed tea house at dawn, that he had not made a decision at all. He had been moved across a board by a hand he never saw, and the love he thought had guided him had been the very thing used to aim him. When Shin finally spoke, it was in the flat voice of a man filing a report. 22 years of loyalty, he said, and the single most important thing I ever did, I did for him without knowing his name was on it. He was quiet for a moment. I should be more upset. I think I have used up my allocation of feelings for the decade. That was as close to grief as Shin came, and from him it was an ocean. If you are still here, type still watching so I know who made it this far, and drop the one word you are feeling right now. Tell me your city, and the time on your clock as you watch. And if you're on a TV, hit like so I know you are in the room. I am asking because what comes next is the part of the story I most want people in the room for. Shin straightened. Then let me be the one to handle Du Han, he said. It is mine to fix. I will go to his house tonight, and it will be finished before morning, and you will never have to put your own hand to your uncle's blood. It was, by the logic of the world they had both lived in for 20 years, a generous offer. A man offering to carry the worst of it, so his boss's hands stayed clean. No, Wu Jin said. Shin frowned, which on Shin was a seismic event. He took 6 years from you. He took a son from you. He used me to do it. If any man has ever earned the ground, it is him. Yes, Wu Jin agreed. He has earned it completely. That is exactly why I am not going to give it to him. If I kill him, he becomes a story, Wu Jin said. A wronged old man, removed by a nephew who feared him. The kind of death that builds a legend and gives the next ambitious man a reason. But if I hand him to a prosecutor, alive, in daylight, with every account and every name attached, he does not become a legend. He becomes a file. He spends the rest of his life as paperwork. He finished the last button. He wanted to be a king. I am going to make him a footnote. It is worse, and it is legal. Shin was quiet for a while. He had killed for this man, hidden for this man, carried weight for this man for 22 years, and he had always understood exactly what Wu Jin was. He was discovering, at dawn in a closed tea house, that he had been working for someone capable of becoming something else, and that he had simply never given him a reason to. Your father would not have done that, Shin said. No, Wu Jin said. He would not have. And he is dead. I would like to try the other thing. So Shin became the inside hand. The man who had spent 6 years as Du Han's unwitting instrument would now be the instrument that took him apart, except this time with his eyes open and the name on it his own choice. He knew the accounts. He knew the routes. He knew which of Du Han's people would fold and which would run. He had carried the organization's secrets in his head for 22 years, and he was about to spend all of them at once, on purpose, in a single morning. At the door, Shin stopped. When this is finished, he said, there will be no organization left. You understand that. You are not handing over Du Han. You are handing over everything, yourself included. I know, Wu Jin said. Shin studied him. What will you be then? Wu Jin thought about a chipped mug and a basket of toys and a boy who asked too many questions. Late for breakfast, he said, and walked out into the morning. When Wu Jin came back to the apartment, Nadia was waiting with the letter in her lap, and she told him the part he had not asked about yet. How she got it. He had assumed Shin sent it to her as a warning, or a threat, or a bait. He was wrong on all three. 3 years ago, Shin had found her. Not the organization. Shin alone, off the books. He had spent 3 years quietly looking for the woman he had sent away, not to finish anything, but because he could not sleep. And when he finally stood at her door for the second time in his life, he did not threaten her.
He could barely speak.
He had handed her the letter and told her the truth he had only just pieced together himself. That he had been used. That the man who used him was named Du-han. That he had written this confession 6 years ago, the night after he sent her away, meaning to give it to Wu Jin, and had never found the courage. I cannot give it to him, Shin had said, but you should have it. If the day comes that you need him to believe you, this is in my own hand. I did not know if it was real, Nadia said. A confession from the man who took everything from me, handed over by that same man, naming someone I had never met. It could have been a trap to flush me out. It could have been a dying man's guilt. I could not tell. So I kept it, and I watched you walk into my restaurant twice a year for 3 years, and I decided I would only ever use it if I was sure you would not turn it into a war. Wu Jin looked at the letter for a long time. The man who had betrayed him was also the only man in his entire life who had ever written the truth down and signed his name to it. The man who took his family had spent 6 years unable to sleep and 3 years trying to give it back. Nothing about it was clean. Everything about it was human. He folded the letter once and set it on the table with a care he did not show most living people. You asked me this morning if I could trust you, Nadia said. I gave you his name before you had done a single thing to earn it. That was my answer. I just needed to say it in the right order. Wu Jin, who had a response for everything, did not have one for that. By the time the sun came up over Seoul, it was already over. Prosecutor Park had spent 3 years building a case she could never close because she could never get inside. In a single night, the inside had walked up to her door and opened itself. Shin fed her everything in order, the way he had once executed instructions, except now, he was the one giving them. Accounts. Routes. The names of the people who would fold and the 2 who would run, and where they would run to. Park did not have to chase a single thread. Each one was handed to her, already pulled. Du-han woke that morning believing he had won. The heir had surfaced. Wu Jin had reacted in public, exactly as planned. The rival faction was moving, the chaos was beginning, and soon enough the old man who wanted nothing would step calmly into the wreckage and take everything.
He poured his tea.
He had waited 40 years. He could afford to enjoy a quiet morning. He did not get to finish the tea. The knock that came was not the kind of man like Du-han ever expected to hear at his own gate. It was patient, official, the knock of people who did not need to hurry, because every exit was already accounted for. He set the cup down very slowly. 40 years of patience, and in the end someone more patient had simply walked up the drive in daylight. There was no shootout. No standoff, no legend, just an old man in an expensive jacket being walked out of his own study with his hands where they could be seen into the back of a car that did not belong to him, to become exactly what Wu Jin had promised. A file, paperwork, a name in a case that would take years to read and would never once call him a king. Park kept her side of the only term that had been asked of her. In the entire mountain of evidence that buried Du-han and the faction beneath him, there was not one line. Not one name, not one photograph of a waitress or a 7-year-old boy. They simply did not exist. For a woman who had spent 6 years working to not exist, it was the first time the world had ever agreed to it on purpose. And the cost was real. By the time the morning was over, the most powerful criminal organization in Seoul did not exist. Wu Jin had not been deposed. He had dismantled it himself, handed the pieces to a prosecutor, and walked out of 15 years of his own life. He stood at the window of an empire that was already gone and felt, for the first time he could remember, completely unguarded. He found he did not miss the wait. When Wu Jin came back to the building that afternoon, he came with no bodyguards, no organization, no armor of any kind because he no longer had any. He pressed the intercom. This time there was no 11-second silence. The door buzzed open before he finished the word. Leo answered the door himself. He looked up at the most feared man in the recent history of Seoul, a man who had ordered the dissolution of an empire that morning, and he conducted the only interrogation Woo Jin had ever genuinely feared. "Do you have a job?" Leo asked. Woo Jin considered this with complete seriousness. "Not anymore," he said. "What happened to it?" "I gave it away." Leo nodded as if this were a perfectly normal thing that happened to grown-ups. "Why is your face like that?" Leo asked next. "Like what?" "Like you're doing math." "I am always doing math." "Are you sad? Or is that just your face?" Woo Jin, who had stared down judges and rival bosses without his pulse moving, felt it climb to 94 beats a minute under questioning from a 7-year-old and answered honestly. "I think it has just been my face," he said. "I am hoping to change it." "I'm Leo," the boy announced, because the interview had apparently gone well enough to warrant it. Woo Jin had read the name in a file the night before. Hearing it from the boy himself, offered freely, was a different thing entirely. It went into him somewhere the file never could. "Leo," he repeated, carefully, like a word he intended to keep. Nadia stood in the inner doorway and watched the two of them, the man she had run from for 6 years and the boy she had run for, meeting in her hallway in the middle of an ordinary afternoon, and she understood that the door she had kept locked for 6 years had not been keeping danger out. It had been keeping this out too. She had simply never been able to tell the difference until the danger was gone. That evening there were 3 places set at a table built for 2. Woo Jin did not fit in the small chair and did not mention it. He had sat at the head of boardrooms that cost more than the building they were in, and he would have traded every one of them to keep being too big for this particular chair. They told Leo who Woo Jin was, gently, on Leo's own timing, with no secret left buried to detonate later in his life. Nadia had decided long ago that her son would grow up with the truth even if she could not give him safety. Now, for the first time, she could give him both. Leo took the news the way Leo took everything, with a few enormous questions and a cheerful acceptance of the unsatisfying answers. Leo found the birthmark on Woo Jin's neck and pressed his own, and announced they were a matching set, like a team, and asked if that meant they were officially family. The crescent mark had been a death sentence for the whole of the night before. A target, the most precise weapon an enemy could find. In a child's hands, by lamplight, it became the thing it had always been meant to be. Not a weapon. A sign that said you are mine, and you are safe. Shin did not vanish from their lives, though everyone half expected he would. There was no empire left for him to guard. So he became something quieter, a heavy silent presence at the edge of a family that knew exactly what he had done, and exactly how he had tried to undo it. 22 years of loyalty, finally spent on something worth protecting. He held a toy fire truck like it might detonate and announced, flatly, that he preferred guarding people who were not trying to kill him. It was the closest he came to joy. The small guarded apartment gave way to something with room in it. A real table. A wide front door that Nadia, for the first time in 7 years, did not need to memorize the exits around. She kept the go bag for a while out of habit, at the back of a new wardrobe, and then one ordinary morning she realized she had not thought about it in weeks, and she let it go. A man who had spent 15 years certain that attachment was a vulnerability spent the following spring walking openly along a public riverside in daylight, holding the hand of a woman who had outrun his entire world, watching their son run ahead toward the water with no idea he had ever been anything other than safe. Woo Jin had built his whole life on welded doors. In the end, the only one that mattered was the one he chose to leave unlocked. That morning months ago, she had told him to ask her again. He never had to. The answer had become the shape of their days, ordinary and unhidden and entirely theirs. And the most feared man in Seoul, who flinched for the first time in 15 years on a Tuesday night because a child ran past him laughing, spent the rest of his life grateful that he did. This story is finished. So tell me the single feeling it leaves you with. Just one word in the comments. Share it with the one person in your life who built a whole quiet world just to keep someone safe, because they will understand it in their chest before the first minute is over. And subscribe, because the next complete love story is already being written. Thank you for staying to the end of this one.